Welcome to the Real Estate Pulse with MacQueen and Gottlieb. I'm Kyle Backer, sitting in for Michael Gossi, and I'm joined by one of the co-founders of the #1 ranked real estate firm, according to Ranking Arizona magazine, Ben Gottlieb. Thanks for being here, Ben.
Absolutely, great to be here.
So Ben, in early August we had our AZRE Forum, and you provided excellent legal analysis on some of the topics that the panel members were discussing. So we asked at that event for attendees to write down some of the questions for you to answer here on the show. But before we get into what the attendees were asking, I wanted to know, what are some of the burning questions that you all at MacQueen and Gottlieb are dealing with right now?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So this has been an interesting month for real estate in particular here in Arizona, and even more in particular for the iBuyer industry. We had a Federal Trade Commission decision come down fining Opendoor $62 million for misleading and deceptive practices. And so this is kind of the big gossip and talk going on in the real estate community over the past several weeks. But essentially, the Federal Trade Commission found through an investigation that Opendoor was misleading buyers and consumers by telling them that they could, through their cutting-edge technology, offer a higher price and allow the buyer to pay less money in transaction costs to ultimately save money. So the seller was paying less money in transaction costs, the seller was getting a higher offer and therefore coming away with more money. But in reality, what the FTC found was that Opendoor's primary revenue was coming from actually buying low and selling high. So it was really a misleading business model that wasn't necessarily a result of the cutting edge technology that Opendoor had to offer, but ultimately from misleading consumers. And so that decision just came down a few weeks ago. There was a $62 million fine, and it's sort of a vindication to real estate agents and maybe a setback from the idea that technology can replace humans, in the real estate industry. And so I think it's a very interesting burning edge issue right now that's very current.
Absolutely, and thanks for sharing it. That is definitely a hot topic here. And now moving into some of the questions that we received from attendees at the AZRE Forum. The first question was asked really focusing on the office. So, with many businesses reassessing the amount of space that they might need, either through staffing challenges or going into a hybrid work schedule, what are some of the options for businesses that might have more space under lease than they need right now?
Sure, absolutely. So first thing, of course, and all real estate lawyers will start with this, but first thing you want to do is check your lease, right? So the Arizona legislature largely has a hands-off approach when it comes to commercial leases. The law presumes that commercial tenants and landlords alike are both sophisticated parties, and so courts are generally going to defer to the lease. So first thing you want to do, check the lease, see if there is a provision perhaps regarding subleasing the space or maybe part of the space, and what those rights and obligations of the parties are. Some leases will state that the tenant can request that from the landlord shall not withhold granting that request unreasonably. Other leases provide more discretion to the landlord. The second thing to think about is under Arizona law in general, a landlord has an obligation to mitigate its damages. Now it's an interesting question when you're talking about downsizing space versus just abandoning space altogether. So this might not be entirely clear how a court would rule on that, but nevertheless, if a tenant abandons space here in Arizona, generally a landlord has an obligation to mitigate its damages by marketing the space, finding a replacement tenant for that space, and then crediting the former tenant with the new rent received from the new replacement tenant. So there's also that to keep in mind. The other thing is, we're in this inflationary environment and rent has gone up. So what we've seen is a lot of landlords are able to get more rent with a new lease or with a new tenant. And so that's another consideration where we are in an environment where agreements can be struck, and we have seen them get struck among clients due to those economic factors that are currently in place.
And on the topic of leases, Ben, another attendee was asking about cannabis businesses. I mean, we know that it's been legal here in Arizona for a couple of years now. It's big business, bringing in a lot of tax revenue. But there is some concern where, it's legal here in the state of Arizona, but still illegal federally. So when it comes to leases and landlords that might be dealing with a tenant that is a dispensary or a cannabis-related business, what are some of the, tricky concerns that they might have to deal with when leasing to these types of businesses?
Yeah, this area of the law never ceases to intrigue me. It's very interesting. Under federal law, it's obviously illegal. And now as everybody knows, you have more and more states that are legalizing marijuana, both medically and recreationally. Here in Arizona, it's legal now, both medically and recreationally. And so it presents some interesting real estate issues, because what you've had are cases where you have leases that are struck, valid leases under Arizona law, but for one reason or another, the tenant might want to cancel that lease or terminate it without really a sound legal basis to do so. And so sometimes these tenants will argue, well, I have an idea. This lease is unenforceable because marijuana is illegal under federal law. And that issue is fairly well settled under Arizona case law, that Arizona courts will give effect to leases, and Arizona courts are not going to invalidate leases merely because of the status of federal law on marijuana. So there's that's settled, and then you also have, of course, the banking issues, and that's a little bit different and presents some different issues. But obviously banks are reluctant to get involved in that business based on the status of federal law. So that's why you see a lot of these cash businesses.
And I know we're in the state of Arizona both have recreational and medical marijuana both legalized. Is there any different issues between those two facilities, since one is more under the medical term as far as it comes to these leases, or in the eyes of the government it's kind of one and the same?
Not so much with the leases. There are some laws with regarding employers discriminating against medical marijuana uses. So I mean, when you're using it medically, there's some more protective laws as to what an employer can do and so forth. So with respect to that, yes, there are some more restrictive laws, but in terms of leases, we haven't seen a whole lot of difference.
Another person that was at the AZRE Forum wanted to know a little bit about 1031 exchanges and whether or not that they're a viable option just for the general investor.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. I mean, obviously the tax benefits from 1031 exchanges are amazing. You can defer, capital gains indefinitely. Where we've seen, people get tripped up is, their eye is so focused on rolling over that capital gain or deferring that capital gain that commercial investors, real estate investors, will overlook certain shortcomings in the real estate transaction itself, and then they're under time pressure to consummate the transaction, and later the case kind of makes its way on to our desk because there might be a case where a buyer is claiming that there was misrepresentation or fraud, or the seller didn't disclose all material information, or perhaps the rental charts were overstated, and so therefore the buyer steps in and is not making as much income as expected on income-producing property. And so we've seen those issues, and some of that may have been able to be avoided through maybe just taking a step back and not completing the transaction. But of course, it's easier said than done when you have that tax benefit dangling before you. So it puts a little bit more pressure on some investors to complete transactions they may otherwise not complete. And sometimes you can see some legal issues that result from that.
Excellent. So it's fair to say that you might want to, have a little bit of knowledge going in when you're making these types of investments, and not just kind of throw it all to the wind.
Yeah, and frankly, probably a good idea to have counsel. Whether it's our firm or another firm, it's probably a great idea to have counsel, because their counsel will be more objective, will slow you down where needed, and while the investor might focus more on locking in the capital gain deferral, counsel will proceed more cautiously.
Absolutely. So, Ben, where can people reach you to learn a little bit more about any of the issues we talked about today or any other real estate law questions that they might have?
Yeah, absolutely. Our number is, our firm number is 602-533-2840. And my email address is ben@mandglawgroup.com.
And you can always learn more by, again, going to mnglawgroup.com. Again, that is mnglawgroup.com. Thanks for watching The Real Estate Pulse with MacQueen and Gottlieb. We'll catch you next time.